I think it's safe to say that Houston surprised most fans in 2023 when instead of being a rebuilding team like most people expected them to be, they finished the season 10-7, a long shot from a preseason poll claiming that it is a bold prediction for us to get 6 wins. Led by young rookie quarterback C.J. Stroud and wide receiver Tank Dell, coached by head coach DeMeco Ryans, this team that, again, many people expected to be rebuilding, won a home playoff game against the Cleveland Browns, and not just won, blew them out. Our story eventually got cut short to the Baltimore Ravens, but that's a very good team and we can hang our heads high with that loss. But even then, they went into free agency hungry and ready for more, making key free agent signings such as Azeez Al-Shaair, Danielle Hunter, Danico Autry, trading for Stephon Diggs, many offseason moves that fans believe are going to make this team a true contender in 2024. Now, all this excitement and the way the season ended made me reminisce to when I first became a Texans fan. It was 2011, and we had just won a playoff game against the Cincinnati Bengals. We were about to play Baltimore in Baltimore for a divisional round playoff game, which we lost just like this year, and I couldn't be more excited for the season ahead. It actually ended up being, in my opinion, the best season the Texans have ever had, and at least my favorite season the Texans have ever had, and that ended up being the 2012 season. 2012 is the best statistical season the Texans have had in their 22 years of existence. It was an offense that was built around Arian Foster and Andre Johnson, with a defense that was the backbone of the team, featuring star players like J.J. Watt and Jonathan Joseph. This team got off to a blazing 6-0 start before finishing the season with a final record of 12-4. But with that being said, in Texans fashion, they blew it in the divisional round and lost to the Patriots. The reason I bring this team up is because in this video, I'm going to question if our squad going into 2024 is better than the team we had going into 2012, and if it's possible to have our best season yet as a franchise. The first position we're going to take a look at is QB, and it hurts to say, but we had Matt Schaub. And I know a lot of fans, when they think of Matt Schaub, they don't think of good memories and good times. But for a while, Matt Schaub was actually a pretty serviceable QB, if not a really good QB. He made it to the Pro Bowl 2 times, and in 2012, it was actually his second best season of his career. He threw for just over 4,000 yards while throwing for 20 touchdown passes behind a mainly play-action offense that was very run-heavy. Schaub's time in Houston definitely didn't end very well, but that's a story for another video. In my opinion, in 2012, he was a very good and serviceable QB that did what he could in our style of offense. But I wouldn't say good and serviceable are the words I would use to describe the 2023 Texans rookie quarterback C.J. Stroud. For much of the year, he was on pace for generational numbers, and even though injuries derailed that, he still finished with 4,300 yards and 23 touchdowns, which was enough to rank him well above his other peers and give him the Rookie of the Year award in 2023. Now, if I'm looking at this personally and just trying to rank the best quarterback out of these two, I think I would easily give it to C.J. Stroud. Not as easy as people may think, but pretty handily. And not just because of the counting stats either. C.J. Stroud's arm is miles better than Matt Schaub's arm ever was, in my opinion, and also his pocket presence 10 times better than Matt Schaub's could ever be, even just as a rookie. So in the first position group, being the most important position group, QB, I'm going to give it to the 2024 squad and move on to the receivers. The 2012 Texans receiving corps was extremely top-heavy. It was led by Texans legend Andre Johnson, who got over 1,500 yards this year, as well as 112 catches. Andre Johnson was the complete and whole package at the receiver, and he carried this Texans passing game, in my opinion. Alongside him, there was a Texans player that I feel like many people forget, and his name was Owen Daniels. He played tight end, and I'm going to include him in the receivers because he actually had the second most receiving yards on our team that season with over 700. Andre Johnson and Owen Daniels both deservedly made the Pro Bowl that year, but after that, it takes a steep drop-off because our next receiver on the depth chart would be Kevin Walters, who had a couple of good seasons for us, but even at his peak was a sub-1,000-yard receiver And in 2012, he gave us a modest 518 on 41 catches. Definitely not bad, but it's not who you would want to be your third option on offense, at least in my opinion. The Texans receiving core going into 2024 is about as stacked as you can get. Starting at the top, they have Stephon Diggs, who's a perennial 1,000-yard receiver. And this past year, he actually had his worst season, which was still 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. So take that how you will. At wide receiver 2, it's Nico Collins, who the Texans drafted 3 years ago out of the University of Michigan, and who just had his breakout season, which was over 1,200 yards. Because of that breakout season, he also got a bag dropped on him as he signed a new extension over the offseason. And rounding out this trio of talented receivers is Tank Dell, who we drafted last year out of the University of Houston, who just last year has 700 yards and 7 touchdowns in only 11 games played. I think it's pretty safe to say that this type of talent does not come often on the receiving end, especially for the Houston Texans as an organization. I know Andre Johnson was very, very talented, and I miss him being on this team. But I have to go with the 2024 receiving core that we're about to see, because who knows what this trio is capable of. It's most definitely the most talented receiver group I've seen in Houston. And this is also without mentioning Dalton Schultz, who also has 600 yards receiving last season and 5 touchdowns. To me personally, it's not even a debate about who wins this one. I'm giving it to the 2024 team and the massive amount of potential that they have. The next position group we have to look at is the running backs. And in 2012, the running backs were the vocal point in the offense, specifically the Texans' all-pro running back Arian Foster. Arian Foster was a beast, man. If anyone remembers watching him play, they can tell you how good this guy was before his injuries, and this year was no different. He racked up 1,400 yards while also rushing for 15 touchdowns. And to me, this doesn't paint the full picture, as his rushing ability was the main thing that made this offense move, as it was a very heavy play-action scheme, and most passes were not going to be open unless the run game was efficient, which it very often was with Foster at the running back position. The Texans also had Justin Forsett and Ben Tate on the roster, who both had decent careers in their own right, but this year they only had 300 yards each to their name as they didn't get a lot of carries, but they were solid backup backs for us. The running back room going into 2024 is a little bit less identified in my opinion. We let Devin Singletary walk this offseason, and for his replacement, we got Joe Mixon from the Cincinnati Bengals. I would say on paper, this replacement would definitely make us a better team and improve us, as Joe Mixon had 1,000 yards last season, and he's just as capable on the receiving end as Devin Singletary was. We also still have Dameon Pierce, who we drafted 2 years ago out of Florida. He had a sophomore slump last season after being introduced to a new offense, but his rookie campaign was something special and showed huge bright spots that we didn't see last year but could see this next upcoming year. I personally believe that this running back room actually has a lot of question marks behind it, with the only established running back being Joe Mixon coming to a new team, so you never know what to expect with that. With the question marks surrounding the 2024 group at running back, I personally have to give this one to 2012 with Arian Foster and co. That running back group was just special, especially when they combined forces with the next position group I'm about to get into. When we look at the Texans' offensive line in 2012, we see why, besides just Arian Foster, this rushing attack was so dominant. This offensive line featured 3 Pro Bowlers in Wade Smith, Chris Myers, and All-Pro left tackle Dwayne Brown. This made for an absolute wall of a blindside for Matt Schaub and provided gaping holes for Arian Foster to run through. I'm not going to get on here and talk like I'm some O-line expert, but if you watch this team back in the day, you could easily tell that the O-line was a huge part of this team's success. And honestly, without their elite play, I think our offense would have struggled mightily. Also, I truly couldn't remember the last time a single team had 3 offensive linemen Pro Bowlers at one time. I looked it up and also couldn't find any answers. So if anyone can correct me on this, let me know, but I think the Texans might have been the last team to do that. The other pieces on the offensive line included rookie Ben Jones and right tackle Derek Newton. Both of these guys were serviceable pieces that did their job. Definitely not net negatives to the team, but just not good enough to make the Pro Bowl this season. Now, looking at this Texans O-line going into 2024, there's clearly not the same level of accolades that our 2012 offensive line accumulated. But with left tackle Laramie Tunsil being the anchor to this offensive line, I actually think they surprised a lot of fans this year. I didn't have high hopes at all going into this season for our offensive line, and I came out of this season feeling much better about our situation. Yes, we still allowed the 11th most sacks out of any team in the league, but even that is a long shot from the way this O-line was playing during the Watson days, because if anyone remembers that, we were the worst O-line in the league by a mile. So there's been a lot of improvement since then, in my opinion. There's also room for improvement in the future as Kenyon Green comes back this year, and I have high hopes for him at the guard position. Overall, though, I think it's kind of clear and obvious who this one's going to, and it's going to have to go to the 2012 team with that monstrous 3 Pro Bowlers on one side of the offensive line. It was really going to be tough to compete with that no matter what, and with Laramie Tunsil being the only real star on this 2024 offensive line, they did not do enough to do that. Now we're going to head to the other side of the football and talk about the 2012 Texans defensive line. This D-line was fresh off of letting first overall pick Mario Williams walk in free agency to the Buffalo Bills, and they were looking for someone to fill his shoes. A second-year J.J. Watt was beginning to take absolute ownership of NFL QBs. He had a whopping 20.5 sacks with 47 QB hits to go along with that. And if you remember, he was batting down balls left and right that season, becoming the absolute complete impact player on the defensive end and winning Defensive Player of the Year in the process. Besides JJ, the Texans had Antonio Smith and rookie Whitney Merciless to help alongside him, who got 7 and 6 sacks respectively. This Texans D-line also included Connor Barwin, who didn't do much for the team, but later broke out for the Philadelphia Eagles. All in all, I would say this defensive line was definitely one to be feared by NFL offensive lines and quarterbacks. Then, if we peek at the Texans defensive line going into 2024, you have to start with Will Anderson Jr., who the Texans drafted 3rd overall and just came off a season where he boasted 7 sacks and 22 QB hits. He won Defensive Rookie of the Year for that performance, and this season, I'm looking for him to have a J.J. Watt breakout type year. And I know that might sound like a bold prediction, but I'll get to that more in a second. Next piece on the defensive line, who I think is going to make a big difference in 2024, is Denico Autry, who the Texans signed from Tennessee. He had a very underappreciated 11.5 sacks last year, and I think the Texans and D'Amico Ryan's scheme is going to utilize him to the best of his abilities this year. After that, you have another new signee in Danielle Hunter, who I won't speak on too much because I already made a video about how I think he's going to impact the Texans, and I'll leave a link to that down below. With all this being said, I want to make the bold prediction that this Texans defensive line going into 2024 is actually going to perform better than the one in 2012, and Will Anderson is going to have a similar breakout year to J.J. Watt and win Defensive Player of the Year. Now, I know that prediction might sound a little fanboyish, but I really think that Will Anderson next to Danielle Hunter is going to make him a huge problem for NFL offenses, especially just with his development as a player. So I know some people will disagree with me, but I'm going to give this one to the 2024 squad and what could potentially be. In 2012, the Texans were just coming off the loss of linebacker D'Amico Ryans. And to make things worse, 5 games into the regular season, their starting linebacker Brian Cushing got hurt. This linebacker core, whose leading tacklers were Brady James and Tim Dobbins, was not full of household names. But even then, they certainly didn't hold the team back because the team had a top 10 defense. This was Brady James' one and only season as a Houston Texan before he retired after that year. And this was Tim Dobbins' one of 3 seasons with the Texans, the other 2 of which I honestly don't remember. But these guys certainly played their role and stepped up when needed in the 2012 season. In 2024, the Texans are actually in a somewhat similar position than that of which they were in 2012. I will say it's probably not as urgent, but Blake Cashman, the leading tackler of last season, walked this year in free agency. In his place, we signed someone who I actually believe can make a huge difference, and that's Azeez Al-Shaair. Azeez actually played last season with the Tennessee Titans, but before that, he was on the 49ers getting coached by guess who, so I really like the potential fit for him. Alongside Azeez is Christian Harris, who had 101 tackles last season, and if you were watching, he just got better and better and better as the season went on. It was really amazing to watch how D'Amico Ryans developed our linebacking core as the season went on, because Henry To'oTo'o also emerged as someone who could be a key piece for us in this next coming season. Overall, while I'm not sure that we have a linebacker as game-changing as Brian Cushing, this linebacking core is extremely deep and has extreme potential, and I'm going to have to give it to them over the lackluster linebacking core of 2012. The Texans cornerback room in 2012 led off with Jonathan Joseph. Jonathan Joseph was a Pro Bowl cornerback that the Texans acquired in 2011. Jonathan Joseph had an all-pro season that year and continued it into this year, having great success. On the other side was Kareem Jackson, who never made a Pro Bowl, but in my opinion had a very underrated NFL career, and this year was actually one of his best years, having 4 picks, the most he ever had in an NFL season. Both these guys, in my opinion, could lock down on any given Sunday, and in the slot was Bryce McCain, who didn't have his best play as a Texan, but still was a serviceable piece. He actually ended up having his best play as a Pittsburgh Steeler, where he got 3 picks in 2014. Now looking at the cornerback room going into 2024, I could see how some people would be a little bit nervous. We let go of Steven Nelson and Tavier Thomas and replaced them by signing Jeffrey Okudah from the Atlanta Falcons and also drafting rookie Kamari Lassiter out of Georgia. The number 1 spot is still going to belong to Derek Stingley, who the Texans drafted number 3 overall in the 2022 draft. He had his breakout year last season, and honestly this season I'm looking for him to build on that immensely and carry this cornerback group. Obviously it can't be a one-man job, but I expect him to help bring along Kamari Lassiter and honestly even help Jeffrey Okudah maybe get back on track to what he was projected to be at one point. Overall, I definitely wouldn't say it's time to hit the panic button at cornerback yet, but I also wouldn't say this cornerback room stacks up that comparably to the 2012 one, having Kareem Jackson and Jonathan Joseph at both of those sides. So I'm going to have to give this one handedly to the 2012 Texans and Jonathan Joseph and Kareem Jackson holding it down. Looking at the Texans safeties in 2012, it started off with free safety Glover Quinn. Now I think when most people hear that name, they think of him playing for the Lions. But what many people forget is before his breakout season in 2014, he actually spent a short time with the Texans. Now, he never reached his Pro Bowl ability with us, but he still did lead the team in combined tackles and got 2 picks. Next to him was someone who was one of my favorite Texans at the time, and that's strong safety Danielle Manning. We acquired Danielle Manning from the Bears in 2011, and although he's never had big counting stats, he's always been one of those players that was always around the ball and that always made big plays when you needed him to. I actually really enjoyed watching this safety group play, and if you remember this time period, I bet you have a special place for them as well. In 2024, the Texans have 2 safeties coming off of disappointing years in my opinion. After coming off a fantastic rookie year, Jalen Petrie did not play up to the expectation I and I think many others had for him this season, looking very out of place in pass coverage situations and sometimes even undersized. On the other side of that, we have strong safety Jimmy Ward, who the Texans signed last offseason from San Francisco. I expected this to be a home run signing, and so far it's been pretty lackluster, and I think other people would agree with me on that. I'm going to cut Jimmy some slack because he did have injury issues last year, but this year is going to be make or break, in my opinion, for both Jimmy Ward and Jalen Petrie. And this is a part in the video where I want to make another prediction and say that both Jalen Petrie and Jimmy Ward do end up having bounce-back seasons. And if they don't, well then we have rookie Kalen Bullock to step in and replace one of them. With that being said, I'm going to give the last and final position group to the 2024 Houston Texans because I think that at their peak, they're the better safeties, and this next season they're going to be playing close to their peak, if not at their peak. Now that all the comparisons are done, that leads us back to the question, do I believe that the 2024 Texans can be the best Texans team of all time? And the answer, if you don't already know it by now, is a resounding yes. This team is one of the best rosters I have ever seen the Texans put together, and I am genuinely full of belief regarding this team. And that's really not something I say often as a Texans fan, and I'm sure other Texans fans can relate to me on that one. But we never know. We're going to have to see what happens this season, and I'm more than excited to watch. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Do you think this team is better, or do you think it's worse? Do you think I got anything wrong in this video? Do you have a different opinion from me? Let me know. Also, please subscribe to this channel. You're not going to want to miss the content we have coming in the season. And also, if you like specifically what you hear from me, follow me on X at Game7Pat for more content. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Peace.